All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this week's Chronicle. I'm going to talk about some of the issues that are going on in the cannabis markets, some of the news, some of the stocks, and hopefully you can get some information that'll help you make some money. Um, First, we always like to go over the themes and the opportunities in these legal cannabis markets. And I've actually combined these widespread social acceptance and inevitable legalization federally. It's really surprising how quickly this has moved along. I mean, a year ago, people would tell me, oh, there's no chance it's going to be legal federally. But it's just a matter of time, and especially because you have these big banks like Goldman Sachs getting involved in the companies up in Canada. And we all know, money makes things happen down in Washington. So it's probably going to be legal federally before you realize it. Everyone knows about recreational opportunities, but I don't think there's the monies to be made there because the cannabis markets are basically glutted and the prices are falling. Um, you want to concentrate on the medicinal things, the biotech play, and it's a shame because marijuana being illegal has nothing to do with health. It has to do with when the first head of the DEA was really racist against Mexicans, and he kind of played it to when there was a lot of Mexican immigration into the country, and basically he was one of the guys that went out to you know catch bootleggers and illegal liquor, and when that became legal, these guys needed to like find a new job, so they started to make marijuana give it this negative campaign, and that's where like that movie Reefer Madness came from, and so forth. Then there's the ancillary opportunities, and like I said, it's you, you want to be you don't want to be the miner, you want to be the guy that sells things to the miner or the person that sells things to the miner, like picks or shovels, because whether they're successful or not, they're going to need picks or shovels. So just something to think about. Um, Going over a bunch of these cannabis companies, a lot of these companies, I would even say most of them, aren't even making money. They're just losing money. I mean, there's a few that are doing okay, but most of them are losing money, and it's very similar. Well, we'll talk about that later. That's when we get to my featured stock of the week that I actually like that I'm considering buying because it's one of these few companies that's actually making money. Emperor Shen Neng, let's introduce him. He supposedly was the first leader to actually discuss marijuana as a medical treatment. Treated the gout, rheumatism, malaria, and I don't get this one, poor memory. Um, I thought smoking weed is supposed to make you lose your memory, but as we shall see, this story may not be as true as people think it is. So in our news this week, Pax Labs raised $420 million in funding. These are a San Francisco-based company that makes vaporizers, and the reason why I bring it up is because these guys set out to raise either 100 or 150 million dollars, and basically the floodgates just opened and they had no problem raising 420 million. I think 420 is probably a whole play on the 420 thing, but be that as may, the point is that there's money coming in to this, like real institutional money. I had to report on this story because High Times has been accused of a Women of Weed trademark infringement. Women of Weed is a group. Um, I guess they're based in Seattle, and it has women that are active in the cannabis industry. But anyway, High Times, the magazine, had a picture in its September issue in where there was a naked woman lying in a bed of marijuana, and it was in the High Times Women of Weed uh, event, or it was at a High Times Women of Weed event. So I guess the ladies over at Women of Weed are not too happy, and they are filing a trademark infringement suit. On to other legal issues. This is something to pay attention to because these different types of marijuanas, they're all different strains and crossbred and so forth and so on, and it's almost akin to wine, right? Um, so there's this suit going on where one marijuana grower has this particular strain, and another grower says that they infringed upon a patent. It's a Colorado-based United Cannabis Corp, and it really comes down to like an intellectual property thing. I mean, does it take intellectual property to create designer weed, so to speak? So that's an interesting thing to follow. That should have like really big repercussions down the road. BNY is putting out this new marijuana fund on the NYSE. Symbol's going to be YOLO, YOLO. And why this is kind of an interesting story is because there's been trouble in this industry, because funds, mutual funds or ETFs, they need big banks to back them to do what's called custodial stuff, like the accounting, sometimes the trading, bookkeeping, so forth and so on. There have been problems because this stuff isn't federally legal. There's been issues like there was MJ is now the symbol. I forget what they were before. Anyway, they were a company that was supposed to be following real estate in Latin America, and they just kind of decided one day, oh, let's make ourselves some marijuana fund. And I guess legally they were allowed to do that, but it wasn't too ethical because the people that invested in the fund didn't know that that was going to happen. And I guess there was all kinds of problems with operations. BNY Mellon is a big custodial bank, so the fact that they're getting involved in this tells me that they think that those problems are going to be clearing up. And then Apria prices 300 million in convertible notes to fund global expansion. Um, Generally, when companies issue convertibles, they have a little bit of a higher rate on them. If things go right, eventually they'll be able to convert these into shares. So just more sign of money coming. All right, now let's take a look at some of these stocks. If you trade or invest in these stocks, you really should know where these levels are. In financial markets, there are certain levels that are more important than others, and markets are either going up, down, or sideways. Okay, so if you know where these levels are, you know where these trends are, it could help you have profitable trading. Now, speaking as someone who is a head of trading at three different funds and a hedge fund trader and blah, 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 blah. I've been around the block more times than I care to admit. I can honestly tell you that I've never seen a successful trader use things like Elliott wave or harmonic patterns or GAN theory. I mean, that stuff's like UFOs. It's fun to talk about, but in my opinion, it's not credible. And frankly, I've never seen anyone use it successfully. All right. But if you'll see, you'll notice that there are certain levels that are important. Now, this is the Horizons uh, marijuana life science ETF. Um, Now look, let's look at levels, right? This was the 20 level. This was important back in early 2018. Guess what? It was important back here in September. My guess is if it gets back up to there one day, and it eventually I think it most likely will, we're going to have some resistance there. So that might be a place where if you want to sell this thing, you might want to have your sell order at 19, say 80 or 1990 because it might never get to 20 because there's a lot of sellers up around this area. All right. Um, Conversely, if you want to buy it and it gets up to this area, you may want to just see if this level breaks. Okay. You're going to be paying a little bit of a higher price, but it's going to have a much better risk reward ratio than if you just try to pick a bottom. Because obviously, if you buy it, there's a chance it could go like that. On the downside, I'm going to be looking at this 15 level. You can see that that was resistance back here in March and June of last year. All right. So this is what institutional traders and professional traders do. They look at levels. Like a typical hedge fund will have a meeting on Monday morning where they're going to go over the positions and the traders are going to tell the managers, this is where this level is, this is where that level is. Like if you're a hedge fund portfolio manager, you decide what to buy, and if you're the trader, you decide how you're going to buy it or sell it, vice versa. So the portfolio manager might say, hey, what are you seeing in this thing? And I would say, well, there's buyers around at 15. Okay, their support at 15. So he might say, well, all right, let's sell it at 15. Or if he wants to buy it, he might say, well, let's really be aggressive here, because ultimately they have to make the decision. So if you're selling it, I think I just misspoke. If you're selling it, he might say, well, that might bounce a little bit off of the support level, so let's wait. If you're buying it, pull the trigger, right? So that's how you can kind of use these levels. I'm confusing you, but I'll try to be a little more clear. All right, now here is Aurora Cannabis, and again, you can see, you know, this 14 level is important. And keep in mind this, obviously is a big holding of the ETF we just looked at, but they still do have different levels, clear levels. So if this thing rallies, I'd be looking for resistance at 14. On the downside, I'm going to be watching 1030 for support. You can see it was resistance here earlier in the year, and it was resistance back here in last June, I believe that was. So again, you don't need to be a guru to tell that certain levels are more important than others. Here's Chronos. Okay, so you see how 14 was a top in September, and then it was a top again here, and I think that's early December. Well, I'm going to be looking for support there. All right. So now, say I wanted to buy this stock, I would probably just be waiting and waiting and waiting until it got down to 14. This General Cannabis is pretty interesting. This is one of these companies that's losing money, but you can tell. And again, this is why you can tell certain levels are important. Look at where it was at the very end of last year, 150 pretty much exactly. I don't know what happened here, but that was the bottom on this day back in March. It recently, found a bottom. It was oversold. It broke its downtrend, and that might not look like much, but that's a 10% move there. Okay, we could have something similar setting up here in this cannabis sativa. Um, Again, two was clear support right last August, and it was support earlier this month, still in a downtrend. If this thing gets oversold again and bounces, keep in mind this is you're looking at a $2 stock here. If this thing goes up, 20 cents or 40 cents, that's a 10 or 20% move. That's real money. So you might want to have this on your radar screen if you're a trader. Use this $2 as your stop out level. All right, here's Medicine Man Technologies, and I wanted to just point this out. It's a pretty interesting story here. This trading was into what were going to be the earnings. Then apparently there's some kind of pending law or pending statute or status that's going on of a bill. I can't even speak right. Given the pending status of this bill that could affect the company significantly, they decided to postpone the call. But this is what I wanted to show you here, and this is a reversal pattern. Okay, um, these are candlesticks. This is probably some kind of a name of some pattern. Doesn't really matter what it is. I just want you to see this, right? If it's blue, the bottom of the blue is where it opened, the top is where it closed. So you can see buyers were in control. The buyers were stronger than the sellers. The forces of demand were stronger than the forces of supply, right? When we got to this day, you can see that the low trade was here, the high trade was here, went back and forth all day, and eventually settled really right there without kind of really moving. So that shows the forces of supply and the forces of demand have equated, right? Now the next day, look what happens. If it's red, it opens at the top and it closes at the bottom. All right, so the next day, the forces of supply take over. They overpower the forces of demand. The buyers are basically done. There's no one else to buy it, and the sellers knock the stock down. So that is just indicative of a pattern. And you don't need to memorize all these things like flying this or triple into that of these candlestick patterns. But if you just kind of learn what this means, buyers in control, buyers in control, buyers in control, buyers and sellers equal, sellers in control, sellers in control. So who knows? Maybe we could trend lower. All right, now this is a company I like, and I'm considering buying it. It's called Organigram, and they grow weed. They're in vaporizers, which I think is good, um, because these vaporizers are huge, not just for cannabis, but for tobacco. But unlike most of these cannabis companies, these guys are actually making money. I mean, as you're aware, there's cannabis seems to be everywhere these days. But what no one seems to be mentioning is that most of these companies are losing money, and there's no future prospects to them. I mean, there are stocks that are literally trading for fractions of a penny. I mean, if that company had a future, why wouldn't the insiders be buying it up? I mean, you could be the, if it's trading for a fraction of a penny, you could be the college intern there for the summer, get paid $15 an hour, and you could buy, millions of shares. And even like Tilray, General Cannabis, well-known companies, they're losing money. This is not a new phenomenon, right? It happened in the internet bubble when all these companies come out and kind of this craze happens. When cars were invented, there was over 300 car companies, and within 20 or so years, that became three companies. Same thing happened in the internet, and that's what's going on here. You're going to see consolidation, and there's going to be some winners, but most of them are going to be losers. Now, this is what I like about this organigram. It's headed in the right direction, all right? Back in 2014, they lost 52 cents a share, okay? 2015, they lost 2 cents a share. 2016 was break even. Back in 2017, they were back to losses of 11 cents. But this year, they actually earned a profit, and analysts think that next year they're going to earn 24 cents a profit a share. So without knowing anything else about this company, without knowing the name, without, you know, if you look at these earnings trends, right, they were losing money, then they were losing less money, then they were breaking even, then they were earning a little bit of money, now they're learning, going to earn more money. That equates to a stock that could be a good buy. I mean, there's not a recommendation, so don't sue me if it goes wrong. Um, but I'm considering putting my own money in this, which I probably will. Another reason why I like this company's potential is because it is followed by 11 analysts on Wall Street. They all seem to like it, which means that there's institutional money going to could potentially get involved. And the average target price is almost $12 a share. Here's a chart of Organigram. I mean, you could see, like, I mean, God, hindsight is 2020. I mean, this thing was trading for less than 50 cents back in early 2016. Today it's trading up at $7. So, unlike most cannabis companies, this one actually makes money. Woo! All right, everybody, that's it for this week. We'll just close with a couple fun facts here. Um, you know who this guy is? Samuel Claudwell. He's the first person to ever be convicted of and sentenced to prison for growing cannabis. Clearly, he was a farmer. I mean, look at his overalls. Looks like he was from Colorado. So this guy went to the Colorado State Penitentiary for growing weed. If you think about it, like how many like African American jazz musicians went to jail for years in the 50s because they got caught with one joint, which now it's like not even, no one's even gonna like, look sideways at you. That's why you got to question authority. Probably my all-time favorite cannabis fact is that the first thing ever sold over the internet was a bag of weed. Students at MIT somehow figured out how to communicate with students over at Stanford in California over what was the original early internet, and they commenced this transaction. No word on how they actually got the weed from one coast to the other, but still a cool fact. And now going back to our Emperor Shane Nung, this is at the DEA museum, and this is evidence that the DEA, don't know what the hell they're doing, and this is nothing new. Um, so the museum says that cannabis use dates back to 2727 BC. Well, that's kind of interesting because the first emperor uh, in China didn't come around until 260 BC. All right. So this guy probably didn't even exist. Maybe that's why there's no chicken dish named after him. In addition, the Chinese didn't even develop writing until about 1200 BC. So if they were smoking weed back then, I don't know who was around to write it because they didn't know how to write. All right, everybody. Yet. Here's a little bit about me. Hope you have a nice night, and I guess I'll be speaking with you soon.